Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez had been walking for 3 hours through the dense German forest when he first spotted the dog. The Alsatian sat perfectly still between two massive oak trees, its golden coat catching the afternoon sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. After 2 tours in Afghanistan and 6 months stationed in Bavaria, he had learned to trust his instincts, and something about this moment felt different. The dog wasn't aggressive. It wasn't cowering either. Instead, it watched Marcus with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Its ears were perked forward, alert but not alarmed. Marcus had always been good with animals. Growing up on his grandfather's ranch in Texas had taught him to read their body language. This Alsatian was trying to communicate something. Marcus had been hiking the Bavarian Forest National Park on his weekend leave, seeking solitude after a particularly difficult week at the base. The recent training exercises had been intense, and the weight of command, even at his level, sometimes felt overwhelming. The forest offered peace that the barracks couldn't provide. He had planned a simple day hike along the marked trails, but somewhere along the way he had taken a wrong turn. Now, as he faced this mysterious dog, Marcus realized he hadn't seen another hiker or even a trail marker in over an hour. His GPS showed he was deep in an unmarked section of the forest, an area that didn't appear on his hiking map. The trees here were older, more massive than those along the tourist paths. The forest floor was thick with decades of fallen leaves, and the air carried a different quality, heavier, more ancient. The Alsatian stood slowly, never breaking eye contact with Marcus. It took 3 deliberate steps backward, then stopped as if waiting. Marcus found himself taking a step forward. The dog repeated the motion, backing away another few paces, its tail held high but not wagging. It was clearly leading him somewhere. Marcus knew he should turn around and try to find his way back to the main trail. Military protocol would suggest retracing his steps and calling for assistance if needed. But something in the dog's demeanor convinced him otherwise. The animal displayed a purposefulness that suggested this wasn't a random encounter. In his years of service, Marcus had learned to recognize when situations were more than they appeared. The forest around them was unusually quiet. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, no distant sounds of other hikers. Even the wind seemed muted here, creating an almost cathedral-like atmosphere among the towering trees. The only sounds were Marcus's boots crunching on the leaf-covered ground and the soft padding of the dog's paws ahead of him. As they moved deeper into the forest, Marcus noticed the trees becoming even more massive and ancient. Some of the oaks had to be hundreds of years old, their trunks so wide that it would take 3 people holding hands to encircle them. Moss covered much of the bark, and strange lichens created abstract patterns on the surfaces. The canopy above was so thick that very little sunlight reached the forest floor, creating a twilight atmosphere even in the middle of the day. The Alsatian maintained a steady pace, never getting too far ahead, always checking to ensure Marcus was following. Its behavior was unlike any wild or stray dog Marcus had encountered. This animal moved with purpose and intelligence, as if it had made this journey many times before. Every so often it would pause at what seemed like random spots, sniff the air or ground, then continue with renewed determination. Marcus began to notice other oddities about their route. They weren't following any visible path, yet the dog seemed to know exactly where to go. They navigated around fallen trees, through small clearings, and past rocky outcroppings, with the confidence of someone, or something, intimately familiar with the terrain. The further they traveled, the more Marcus realized they were heading steadily uphill. Though the gradient was so gentle he had barely noticed initially. The silence of the forest began to feel less peaceful and more expectant, as if the trees themselves were waiting for something to happen. Marcus found himself checking his watch more frequently, though time seemed to move differently here. What felt like minutes of walking turned out to be nearly an hour according to his timepiece. The quality of light filtering through the canopy remained constant, making it difficult to gauge the passage of time naturally. As they crested a small hill, the Alsatian stopped abruptly. Its ears shot up, and for the first time since their journey began, its tail began to wag slowly. Marcus followed the dog's gaze through the trees ahead and felt his breath catch in his throat. There, partially hidden by the massive trunks and hanging moss, was the outline of a structure. From this distance it appeared to be a cabin, though unlike any hunting lodge or forest shelter he had ever seen. Even from hundreds of yards away, Marcus could tell this building was old. Very old. The dog looked back at Marcus one final time, its eyes seeming to search his face for something. Then, with what Marcus could only describe as a nod of satisfaction, the Alsatian began the final approach toward the mysterious cabin, its tail now wagging with unmistakable excitement. Marcus followed, his heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation, completely unaware that he was about to discover something that would change his understanding of history, mystery, and the thin line between the two. As Marcus drew closer to the cabin, the structure revealed details that defied his expectations. This wasn't the typical hunting lodge or forest ranger station he had anticipated. The building appeared to be constructed entirely from local stone and massive timber beams, but the architecture was unlike anything he had seen in Germany. The walls were thick and solid, built to withstand centuries rather than decades. Intricate carvings decorated the wooden elements, symbols and patterns that seemed both familiar and completely foreign. The Alsatian had reached the cabin's front door and now sat patiently, as if this had always been their destination. The door itself was remarkable, constructed from what appeared to be a single piece of dark-aged wood, bound with iron hardware that showed the distinctive marks of hand forging. Above the door, carved into the stone lintel, were symbols that Marcus couldn't identify. They weren't German, nor did they match any of the European languages he had encountered during his deployment. Marcus approached slowly, his military training keeping him alert for any signs of current habitation, but everything about the cabin suggested it had been abandoned for a very long time. Moss grew along the base of the walls, and several of the smaller windows were partially obscured by vines. Yet despite its apparent age, the structure appeared remarkably well preserved, as if the forest itself had been protecting it from the elements. The windows were small and set deep into the thick stone walls, their glass so old it had developed the wavy quality of hand-blown panes. Through these ancient windows, Marcus could see nothing but darkness inside. The cabin was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with what looked like several rooms extending back from the main structure. A stone chimney rose from the center of the building, its top barely visible above the surrounding trees. What struck Marcus most profoundly was the complete silence surrounding the cabin. Even the normal forest sounds seemed muted here, as if the very air absorbed noise differently. The Alsatian remained motionless beside the door, its attention focused entirely on Marcus, waiting for him to make the next move. Marcus circled the building slowly, noting additional details that deepened the mystery. The foundation stones were massive, some weighing what must have been several tons. How had builders transported such materials to this remote location, and when? The construction techniques appeared to be from another era entirely, possibly medieval or even earlier. Yet the building showed no signs of major deterioration that would be expected from such age. Behind the cabin, Marcus discovered a small clearing where the remains of what had once been a garden were still visible. Raised stone beds outlined areas where herbs and vegetables had once grown, and a few hardy perennials still struggled up through the undergrowth. A stone-lined well stood at the center of the garden, its wooden cover green with age but still intact. Most intriguingly, Marcus found evidence of recent maintenance. While the cabin was clearly very old and long abandoned, someone had been caring for it. Loose stones in the garden walls had been reset. Dead branches had been cleared from around the structure. The wooden shutters, though aged, were properly secured. Someone, or something, had been looking after this place. The Alsatian appeared beside Marcus as he examined the garden, its behavior now more relaxed. It walked to the well and sniffed around the base, then looked up at Marcus expectantly. Following the dog's lead, Marcus approached the well and peered down into its depths. The water level was low but visible, and remarkably, the water appeared clear and fresh. A wooden bucket hung from a rope inside the well, suggesting it was still functional. As Marcus straightened up from the well, he noticed something that made him freeze. Fresh footprints in the soft earth around the garden beds. Human footprints made within the last few days based on their clarity. Someone else knew about this cabin. Someone who visited regularly enough to maintain it. The prints appeared to belong to an elderly person, based on their size and the way they pressed into the earth with careful, measured steps. The discovery of the footprints changed everything. This wasn't an abandoned historical curiosity. This was someone's secret retreat. Marcus felt a moment of uncertainty about his presence here. He was trespassing, following a dog to a place where he clearly wasn't expected. Military protocol suggested he should leave immediately and report the location if it seemed significant. But as he considered retreating, the Alsatian moved to the cabin's front door and began to scratch gently at the wooden surface. Not the aggressive scratching of a dog trying to get inside, but rather a polite announcement of arrival. The dog looked back at Marcus, its expression almost pleading. It was clear the animal wanted him to try the door. Marcus approached the door with growing curiosity and apprehension. The iron handle was cold under his hand, and he half expected it to be locked. Instead, the handle turned easily, and the door swung open on well-maintained hinges that moved silently despite their obvious age. The Alsatian immediately trotted inside, disappearing into the darkness within. Standing at the threshold, Marcus could smell the interior of the cabin, not the musty, closed air he expected from an abandoned building, but rather the pleasant aroma of wood smoke, dried herbs, and old books. Light from the doorway illuminated only the first few feet of what appeared to be a main room. Beyond that, shadows concealed whatever secrets the cabin held. The wooden floor just inside the door was worn smooth by countless footsteps over what must have been centuries. A few feet into the room, Marcus could make out the edge of what appeared to be a large, hand-woven rug. Along one wall, shelves lined with mysterious objects stretched into the darkness. The ceiling beams overhead were massive and dark with age, disappearing into shadows above. From somewhere deeper in the cabin came the soft sound of the Alsatian's claws on the wooden floor, followed by what sounded almost like a contented sigh as the dog settled down somewhere inside. It was clear the animal was completely at home here, perhaps more at home than anywhere else. Marcus stood at the threshold for a long moment, weighing his options. Every instinct told him this place held secrets that went far deeper than a simple abandoned cabin in the woods. The Alsatian had brought him here for a reason, and that reason was waiting somewhere in the darkness ahead. Marcus stepped across the threshold, and immediately the temperature seemed to change. The air inside was warmer than the cool forest atmosphere, as if the thick stone walls held and radiated heat from some unseen source. As his eyes adjusted to the dim interior, he began to make out the remarkable contents of the main room. The space was much larger than the exterior had suggested, with the ceiling disappearing into shadows above. Heavy wooden beams supported the structure, each one hand-hewn and darkened by centuries of time. The walls were lined with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, and these shelves held the most extraordinary collection Marcus had ever seen. Books filled many of the shelves, not modern volumes, but ancient texts bound in leather that had aged to rich browns and deep blacks. Some appeared to be handwritten manuscripts, their pages thick with the texture of handmade paper. Others showed the distinctive characteristics of very early printing, with uneven lettering and wide margins filled with hand-drawn illustrations and notes. But the books were only part of the collection. Glass containers held specimens that Marcus couldn't immediately identify: dried plants, crystalline formations, and objects that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. Wooden boxes of various sizes occupied other shelves, their contents hidden but clearly important based on their careful placement and the detailed labels written in multiple languages. Maps covered much of one wall, but these weren't modern cartographic works. These appeared to be hand-drawn representations of regions Marcus didn't recognize, with notations in scripts that seemed to blend Latin with symbols he had never encountered. Some maps showed familiar European coastlines, but with details and place names that didn't match anything from his geography studies. The Alsatian had settled on a thick rug near what appeared to be a reading area. A large wooden table dominated this section of the room, its surface covered with open books, writing instruments that looked handmade, and sheets of parchment covered with detailed drawings and notes. A high-backed chair sat behind the table, worn smooth by years of use. Marcus approached the table carefully, aware that he was examining someone's active workspace. The open books were written in languages he couldn't read, though some contained detailed botanical illustrations of plants he didn't recognize. The drawings on the loose parchment appeared to be maps of the local forest, but with far more detail than any official survey would contain. Every tree, rock formation, and water source was meticulously marked. One particular drawing caught his attention. It showed the exact route he had taken to reach the cabin, including landmarks he remembered passing. The path was marked with small symbols, And at the end of the route, where the cabin should be, someone had drawn a detailed illustration of the Alsatian. The dog in the drawing was identical to his guide, down to the distinctive white marking on its chest. As Marcus studied the drawing more closely, he noticed writing along the margin in what appeared to be English. Though the handwriting was old-fashioned and difficult to read, he could make out fragments. Guardian knows the worthy, and American Soldier Autumn, followed by what looked like the current year. The implications sent a chill down his spine. Behind the reading area, Marcus discovered a stone fireplace with a chimney that disappeared into the darkness above. The fireplace showed signs of recent use, fresh ashes in the grate and a neat stack of split wood beside the hearth. Above the mantel, more maps and drawings were pinned to the stone, creating a complex display that seemed to tell a story Marcus couldn't yet understand. The most striking feature of this wall display was a large, detailed map of the local region that appeared to be hundreds of years old. Unlike modern maps, this one showed the forest as it might have appeared centuries ago, with different river courses and geographical features. But overlaid on this ancient map were modern additions, recent roads, the current military base where Marcus was stationed, and even what appeared to be hiking trails and landmarks from contemporary times. Someone had been updating this ancient map for generations, adding new information while preserving the old. Different ink colors and handwriting styles suggested multiple contributors over many decades. The most recent additions appeared to be in the same hand that had created the drawing of his route to the cabin. As Marcus examined the maps more closely, the Alsatian rose from its comfortable position and moved to another area of the room. The dog stopped beside what appeared to be a simple wooden chest and looked back at Marcus expectantly. The chest was different from the other furnishings. While old, it seemed newer than the rest of the cabin's contents, perhaps only decades old rather than centuries. The chest was unlocked, its lid secured only by a simple iron clasp. The Alsatian sat beside it, its behavior making it clear that Marcus was meant to open it. As he approached, Marcus noticed that the wood of the chest bore the same type of carved symbols he had seen above the cabin's front door, but these carvings appeared fresher, more recently made. Marcus knelt beside the chest and carefully lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be oiled cloth, were several items that immediately captured his attention. The first was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with entries in multiple languages and hands. The most recent entries were in English, written in the same style as the marginal notes on the forest maps. Beneath the journal were several photographs, not modern digital prints, but older film photographs that had been carefully preserved. The images showed the cabin and surrounding forest, but also people Marcus didn't recognize. Some photographs appeared to be from several decades ago, based on the clothing and image quality. Others seemed more recent. One photograph in particular made Marcus's hands shake slightly as he held it. It showed a man in what was clearly an American military uniform, though from an earlier era, possibly World War II or Korea. The soldier stood in front of the cabin with the same Alsatian, or one identical to it, sitting beside him. The resemblance between this unknown soldier and Marcus himself was striking enough to be unsettling. At the bottom of the chest, wrapped in silk that had aged to a pale yellow, Marcus found an object that defied easy explanation. It appeared to be made of metal, but unlike any metal he had encountered, the object was roughly the size of his palm, with a smooth, almost organic shape that seemed to shift slightly in the light. As he held it, the metal felt warm, almost alive, and seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. The Alsatian whined softly, the first sound it had made since entering the cabin. The dog's attention was fixed on the metal object, and its behavior suggested both reverence and anticipation. Whatever this object was, it clearly held special significance for the dog, and by extension, for whoever maintained this extraordinary cabin in the depths of the Bavarian forest. Marcus set the mysterious metal object aside carefully and picked up the leather journal. The cover was worn smooth by countless hands, and when he opened it, the first pages revealed entries dating back to the early 1800s. The handwriting was formal and precise, written in what appeared to be German, though Marcus could make out occasional English words scattered throughout the text. As he flipped through the pages, Marcus discovered that the journal contained entries from many different people over more than 2 centuries. Each contributor seemed to have added their own section before passing the responsibility to someone else. The handwriting styles, ink colors, and languages changed throughout the book, creating a complex historical record maintained by successive guardians. The first entries he could fully understand were written in English, dating from the 1940s. The author identified himself as Lieutenant James Morrison, U.S. Army, 3rd Infantry Division. Marcus's military training helped him recognize the unit designations and understand the context. Morrison had been part of the American forces that occupied Germany after World War II. Morrison's entries described discovering the cabin in circumstances remarkably similar to Marcus's own experience. He had been hiking alone in the forest when he encountered an Alsatian that led him to this same location. The descriptions were so detailed and familiar that Marcus felt as if he were reading about his own afternoon, written 75 years earlier. But Morrison's story went far beyond a simple discovery. His entries revealed that the cabin had been maintained by a succession of guardians for centuries, each chosen by the dogs that seemed to appear when new caretakers were needed. The Alsatians, according to Morrison's research, were descendants of a line that had been protecting this location for generations beyond counting. Morrison had spent months researching the cabin's history, and his findings painted an extraordinary picture. The structure had been built in the 13th century by a group of scholars and mystics who had fled religious persecution in other parts of Europe. They had chosen this remote location to preserve knowledge and artifacts that would have been destroyed elsewhere. Over the centuries, the original inhabitants had developed a system for ensuring the cabin's protection. They had trained successive generations of dogs to seek out individuals with specific qualities: military personnel, scholars, or others with the strength and discretion to maintain the secret. Each guardian typically served for several decades before training a successor and passing on the responsibility. The journal revealed that the cabin contained one of Europe's most significant hidden libraries, with texts and artifacts spanning thousands of years of human knowledge. Many items had been rescued from libraries and centers of learning that were destroyed during various wars and periods of upheaval. The collection included Greek and Roman manuscripts, Islamic scientific texts, medieval alchemical works, and countless other volumes that existed nowhere else in the world. Morrison's entries also explained the metal object Marcus had found. According to the research Morrison had conducted, it was called the Keeper's Key and served multiple purposes. It was both a symbol of the Guardian's authority and a practical tool for accessing hidden compartments and protected sections of the library. The metal itself was described as being of unknown composition, possibly created using techniques lost to modern science. As Marcus continued reading, he discovered that Morrison had served as guardian until 1963, when he had trained his replacement, a German scholar named Dr. Heinrich Weber, who had sought refuge in the forest while fleeing East Germany. Weber's entries, written in a mixture of German and English, described expanding the cabin's collection with materials he had rescued from libraries behind the Iron Curtain. Weber had served until the early 1990s, when age and failing health forced him to seek a successor. His final entries described meeting a young American graduate student named Sarah Chen, who had been studying medieval manuscripts in European libraries. Like Morrison and Marcus, Chen had been led to the cabin by one of the guardian dogs while hiking in the forest. Chen's entries, which filled the most recent sections of the journal, revealed that she had modernized many of the cabin's preservation techniques while maintaining its traditional secrecy. She had installed climate control systems powered by hidden solar panels and had created digital backups of the most fragile manuscripts. Her work had ensured that the collection would survive into the 21st century while remaining completely hidden from the outside world. The final entry in the journal was dated only 6 months earlier. Chen described feeling her tenure as guardian coming to an end and preparing for the arrival of her successor. She had dreamed repeatedly of an American soldier who would be led to the cabin by the current guardian dog, a descendant of the same line that had brought Morrison decades earlier. Her description of this soldier matched Marcus in remarkable detail, including his unit assignment and even his planned hiking route. As Marcus finished reading Chen's final entry, he heard footsteps on the wooden floor behind him. He turned to see a woman in her 60s standing in a doorway he hadn't noticed before. She was small and slight, with graying hair pulled back in a simple style, wearing practical hiking clothes that had clearly seen years of use in the forest. "Dr. Chen, I presume," Marcus said, rising to his feet. She smiled, her expression mixing warmth with careful evaluation. "Sarah will do. And you must be Sergeant Rodriguez. You're exactly as I saw you in the dreams, though somehow I expected you to be taller." The Alsatian had moved to Chen's side, its tail wagging gently as it looked between the two humans. It was clear the dog had been expecting this meeting and was pleased with how events were unfolding. "I've been watching from the back room since you arrived," Chen continued. "Klaus here," she gestured to the dog, "has been restless for weeks, disappearing into the forest for hours at a time. I knew he was searching for you, though I wasn't sure exactly when you would arrive." Marcus gestured to the journal in his hands. "This is incredible. The history, the collection, everything Morrison and Weber and you have preserved here. But I don't understand why I'm here, or what you expect me to do." Chen moved to the reading table and sat in the worn chair, her movements showing the careful precision of someone who had spent decades working with fragile materials. "The role of guardian isn't something you choose, Marcus. It's something that chooses you. The dogs have never been wrong about selecting the right person, and they've never failed to find someone when the time comes for a transition." She picked up one of the photographs from the open chest and handed it to Marcus. It showed the cabin surrounded by a group of people from various time periods, their clothing spanning several centuries. In the front of the group, several Alsatians sat at attention, their intelligent eyes focused on the camera. "Every person in this photograph was led here the same way you were," Chen explained. "Each one thought they were simply taking a hike in the forest when they encountered one of the guardian dogs. None of them were looking for this responsibility, but all of them recognized its importance once they understood what we do here." Marcus studied the faces in the photograph, noting the diverse backgrounds and time periods represented: soldiers, scholars, refugees, and adventurers, all united by their chance encounter with destiny in the depths of the Bavarian forest. "What exactly would I be guarding?" Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would be more complex than he could imagine. Sarah Chen rose from her chair and moved to what Marcus had assumed was a simple wooden panel on the far wall. She pressed the keeper's key against a small indentation in the wood, and the metal object glowed briefly with that same inner light Marcus had noticed earlier. With a soft clicking sound, the panel slid aside, revealing a passage that extended deeper into the hillside. "The main room is just the entrance," Chen explained, gesturing for Marcus to follow her. "The real library extends far back into the mountain. The original builders chose this location because of the natural cave system that already existed here. They simply enhanced what nature had provided." Klaus the Alsatian trotted ahead of them into the passage, clearly familiar with the route. The corridor was lined with the same stone construction as the cabin, but here Marcus could see where natural rock formations had been incorporated into the walls. Electric lighting, obviously a modern addition, illuminated their path while maintaining the ancient atmosphere of the space. As they walked deeper into the mountain, Chen explained the history of what they were about to see. When the original scholars arrived here in the 13th century, they were fleeing the destruction of libraries across Europe. Religious conflicts, wars, and political upheavals were destroying thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. These men and women decided to create a secret repository where the most important works could be preserved. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The space extended far beyond what the electric lighting could fully illuminate, with stone shelves carved directly into the living rock. Thousands upon thousands of books, scrolls, and manuscripts filled every available surface, organized in a system that had clearly evolved over centuries. "This is just the first chamber," Chen said, noting Marcus's amazement. "There are 7 more rooms of similar size, each dedicated to different types of knowledge: mathematics and astronomy, natural philosophy and medicine, history and literature, religious texts from dozens of traditions, and several chambers we call the special collections." Marcus walked slowly along the nearest row of shelves, marveling at the age and variety of the materials. Many volumes were bound in leather so old it had turned nearly black, while others showed the distinctive characteristics of papyrus and vellum. Some books were chained to the shelves in the medieval manner, indicating their particular value and rarity. Chen pulled a particular volume from one shelf and opened it carefully. The pages revealed illuminated manuscript text in Latin, with margins filled with intricate drawings in gold and brilliant colors that seemed as fresh as the day they were painted. This is a 9th century treatise on optics that was thought to be completely lost. The monks who created it were centuries ahead of their time in understanding how light behaves. She replaced the manuscript and led Marcus deeper into the chamber, pointing out other treasures as they walked. That shelf contains works by Greek mathematicians that exist nowhere else in the world. Over there are Islamic texts on astronomy and navigation that were rescued from libraries in Spain during the Reconquista. And this section holds Norse sagas that were never written down anywhere else. The scope of the collection was overwhelming. Marcus had always enjoyed history, but seeing these original sources brought the past to life in ways he had never imagined. Every book represented not just information, but the dedicated work of scholars and scribes who had preserved knowledge across centuries of tumultuous change. "How do you maintain all of this?" Marcus asked, gesturing at the seemingly endless rows of ancient materials. "The preservation requirements alone must be enormous." Chen smiled and led him to what appeared to be a modern control panel, cleverly disguised within the stone wall. That's where the succession of guardians has been crucial. Each one brings new skills and knowledge to the task. Morrison brought military organization and security protocols. Weber contributed scholarly expertise and conservation techniques. I've added modern climate control and digital preservation methods. The control panel revealed the sophisticated systems Chen had installed throughout the underground complex. Temperature and humidity were carefully regulated in each chamber, customized for the specific types of materials stored there. Air filtration systems protected against dust and pollutants, while hidden sensors monitored for any environmental changes that might threaten the collection. But the technology is only part of what's needed, Chen continued as they moved toward another chamber. The real requirement is dedication to preserving knowledge for its own sake. Every guardian has understood that what we protect here doesn't belong to us. We're simply temporary caretakers for all of human civilization. The second chamber they entered was devoted to maps and navigational materials. Ancient charts showing coastlines as they existed centuries ago shared space with star charts and astronomical calculations. Marcus found himself particularly drawn to a collection of maps showing the Americas as European explorers first encountered them, complete with detailed notes about indigenous peoples and natural resources. Some of these maps were used by Columbus himself, Chen explained, noticing his interest. Others show the Pacific explorations of Magellan and his successors. This collection represents the expansion of human knowledge about the world itself, recorded by the people who were actually there. In the third chamber, they encountered the special collections Chen had mentioned. This room contained materials that defied easy categorization. Alchemical texts with formulas that seemed to blend chemistry with what could only be called magic, astronomical observations that predated official discoveries by centuries, and mechanical diagrams for devices that appeared impossibly advanced for their time periods. Every guardian eventually becomes fascinated by this room, Chen said, watching Marcus examine a diagram that appeared to show a flying machine designed centuries before the Wright brothers. Some of these materials suggest that human knowledge has advanced and been lost multiple times throughout history. Other items seem to document phenomena that we still don't understand today. Klaus had remained close to them throughout the tour, his behavior suggesting he was as much a guide through the library as he had been through the forest. The dog seemed to know exactly where they were going and what they would find in each chamber, as if he had made the same tour with previous guardians countless times before. The dogs understand more than we give them credit for, Chen observed. Following Marcus's gaze to their canine companion, they seemed to inherit not just the instinct to find new guardians, but also knowledge about the library itself. Klaus knew exactly which sections of the collection you would find most interesting, and he's been leading us there deliberately. As they prepared to enter the fourth chamber, Chen paused and turned to face Marcus directly. "Before we go further, I need to know if you're willing to accept this responsibility. What you've seen already represents only a fraction of what we preserve here. The commitment required is substantial, typically 20 to 30 years of your life living in relative isolation, dedicating yourself to maintaining and protecting knowledge that the world believes is lost forever." Marcus looked back at the chambers they had already explored, thinking about the incredible treasures hidden beneath the Bavarian forest. The scope of the responsibility was daunting, but the importance of what they were preserving was undeniable. Somewhere in these chambers were answers to questions humanity had been asking for thousands of years, and possibly questions they hadn't even learned to ask yet. "What happens if I say no?" Marcus asked. Chen smiled sadly. "Klaus will lead you safely back to the main trails, and you'll continue your life as if this afternoon never happened. But he'll keep searching until he finds someone who will say yes. The library has never gone without a guardian, and it never will as long as there are people who understand the value of preserving knowledge for future generations." Marcus stood in the ancient stone chamber, surrounded by centuries of preserved human knowledge, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. Everything about his military career had prepared him for clear chains of command and defined missions, but this choice belonged to him alone. Klaus sat nearby, watching with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than any dog should. "I need to see it all," Marcus said finally. "Before I can make this decision, I need to understand exactly what I'd be protecting." Chen nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what Morrison said when he stood in this same spot 75 years ago. Come on, there's something in the final chamber that will help you understand why this matters so much." They continued deeper into the mountain, through chambers containing medieval illuminated manuscripts, Renaissance scientific treatises, and collections of folk knowledge from cultures around the world. Each room revealed new wonders that challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about human history and capability. The fifth chamber contained what Chen called the medical collection, texts on healing, practices from every continent and time period. Ancient Egyptian surgical procedures sat alongside Native American herbal remedies and Chinese acupuncture charts that predated their supposed invention by centuries. One particular section held detailed anatomical drawings that were far more accurate than anything produced in Europe until the Renaissance. Yet these were clearly much older. Many of these healing practices were suppressed or lost when traditional knowledge was replaced by more modern approaches, Chen explained. Some of the techniques described here could revolutionize current medical practice, but they've been preserved here because no one in the outside world was ready to accept them. The sixth chamber housed what could only be described as technological manuscripts, detailed plans and diagrams for machines and devices that seemed impossibly advanced for their supposed time periods. Marcus found himself staring at blueprints for mechanical calculators from the 12th century, hydraulic systems that wouldn't be reinvented until the Industrial Revolution, and optical instruments that appeared to be telescopes designed centuries before Galileo. "This is the room that convinced Morrison to stay," Chen said, watching Marcus examine a diagram of what appeared to be a printing press designed 200 years before Gutenberg. He realized that human innovation has happened repeatedly throughout history, only to be lost during wars, plagues, or periods of social upheaval. These plans represent lost branches of human development. But it was the seventh and final chamber that truly took Marcus's breath away. This room was different from the others, smaller with a domed ceiling that had been painted with star charts so detailed they seemed three-dimensional. At the center of the room stood a single pedestal holding an object that defied description. The object appeared to be made of the same unknown metal as the keeper's key, but much larger and far more complex. It was roughly spherical, about the size of a basketball, with intricate patterns etched into its surface that seemed to move and shift when viewed from different angles. As Marcus approached, the object began to emit a soft, musical humming that seemed to resonate in his bones. "We call it the archive," Chen said softly. "It's the reason this entire library exists. Everything else we preserve is important, but this is irreplaceable." Marcus walked slowly around the pedestal, studying the object from every angle. The metal surface was warm to the touch, and the patterns seemed to respond to his presence, becoming more active and luminous as he drew closer. "What is it exactly?" "We're not entirely sure," Chen admitted. "The original scholars who built this place found it buried in the mountain, apparently much older than even the natural caves. Every guardian has studied it, and each one has discovered new properties and capabilities. But its primary function seems to be as a repository for information." Chen approached the pedestal and placed her hands on either side of the archive. The humming intensified, and suddenly the air above the object shimmered with what appeared to be three-dimensional images, maps, diagrams, text in countless languages, and symbols that didn't correspond to any known writing system flowed through the display. "It contains everything," Chen explained. her voice filled with wonder despite having witnessed this phenomenon countless times. Every text in our library is stored here, along with thousands of others that exist nowhere else. But it's not just a storage device. It seems to actively preserve and protect information, somehow knowing what's important to maintain. The images flowing above the archive began to focus on content related to Marcus himself. He saw military histories from every major conflict in human history, tactical manuals from civilizations he'd never heard of, and strategic analyses that seemed to blend historical knowledge with predictions about future conflicts. It responds to the interests and knowledge of whoever approaches it, Chen continued. For Morrison, it showed engineering and logistics information that helped him understand how to maintain this place during the post-war period. For Weber, it revealed historical connections that helped him identify which texts needed immediate preservation. For me, it's provided technological knowledge that's allowed me to modernize our preservation systems. Marcus found himself mesmerized by the flow of information above the archive. Military strategies from ancient Rome blended with guerrilla tactics from more recent conflicts, while technological innovations showed connections between developments separated by centuries. It was as if the archive understood not just what had happened in human history, but how different events and innovations were connected across time. The archive is why the Guardians are always military personnel or scholars, Chen explained. It requires someone with the intellectual capacity to understand what they're seeing and the discipline to use that knowledge responsibly. Every Guardian eventually realizes that what we preserve here isn't just history. It's a roadmap for humanity's future development. Klaus had entered the chamber with them and now sat beside the pedestal, his attention focused entirely on Marcus. The dog's behavior suggested this was the moment of final decision, the point where Marcus had to choose whether to accept the role of Guardian or return to his normal life. Morrison served for 23 years. Chen said softly. Weber for 28. I've been here for 31 years and I've never regretted the decision to stay. This work connects you to something larger than yourself, something that transcends individual lives and national boundaries. Marcus thought about his military career, his plans for the future, and the life he would be leaving behind. Then he looked at the archive, still displaying its incredible wealth of preserved knowledge, and at Klaus, whose ancestors had been protecting this place for centuries. If I accept this responsibility, Marcus asked, what happens to my current life, my military service, my family back in Texas? You'll complete your current deployment, Chen explained. But gradually you'll find reasons to return to this area. The transition usually takes about a year. Eventually, people in your old life will assume you've simply chosen to remain in Europe. The cover story writes itself. You wouldn't be the first American soldier to fall in love with Bavaria and decide to stay. Marcus walked around the archive one more time, watching as it continued to display information that seemed perfectly tailored to his interests and background. The scope of knowledge contained within this one object was staggering, and the responsibility of protecting it felt both overwhelming and profoundly important. The hardest part, Chen added, is knowing that you can never share what you learn here with the outside world. Everything we preserve must remain secret until humanity as a whole is ready for it. That's been the covenant since the beginning. We preserve knowledge for future generations, not our own. As Marcus considered his decision, he realized that Klaus had been watching him throughout their entire tour of the library. The dog hadn't just led him here randomly. Every step of their journey had been deliberate, calculated to show him exactly what he needed to see to make an informed choice. How long do I have to decide? Marcus asked. Chen smiled. You've already decided, Marcus. You knew the moment you chose to follow Klaus into the forest. The question isn't whether you'll accept this responsibility. It's whether you're ready to admit that this is what you've been searching for your entire life. Marcus looked around the chamber one final time, taking in the star charts on the ceiling, the archive with its flowing display of preserved knowledge, and Klaus waiting patiently for his decision. Then he reached out and placed his hand on the warm metal surface of the archive, feeling it pulse with recognition beneath his palm. All right, he said quietly. I'm ready to become a guardian. The archive's humming intensified briefly as if acknowledging his acceptance, and Klaus rose to his feet with what could only be described as satisfaction. Sarah Chen smiled and placed her own hand beside his on the ancient device. Welcome to the most important job in the world, Marcus Rodriguez. Let's begin your real education.